we are able to fill the demands from various areas. But of course, through these demands, we need this cooperation between all the players. I already conclude. You all know, you have ever heard of this I'm trying to quote from what this is. Famous management guru Peter Drucker said that if you cannot measure it, you cannot manage it. I really take this opportunity to wish you fruitful deliberations and declare this workshop official open. Signed Dr. Chris Mukisa, Executive Director, UBOS. Colleagues, we shall continue. I will be around for the rest of the day. So we shall continue exchanging whatever comes out from this workshop. We shall continue discussing. But allow me to sit down. I have already finished the remarks from the Executive Director. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, representative of the ED of UBOS, and for officially opening the workshop. But before we go further, would like to now invite Mr. Stephen Opio, the ILO focal person in Uganda, to give his remarks at this opening of the workshop to discuss the report on better regional migration management. Mr. Opio, you're welcome.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think it would be in order for me to say Happy Labor Day, especially because my bosses are here and they just celebrated Labor Day yesterday. My bosses from the trade unions, as well as from government, Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development. Thanks for organizing the Labor Day celebrations yesterday at 1. My name is Stephen Opio, and I speak on behalf of the ILO in this meeting. And I would want to say thank you to the representative of the UBOS Executive Director for those remarks. I'll focus my statement on only 3 top messages and not dwell so much into what the ILO is or what the ILO is not. Now, one key area that is of concern to many governments lately, especially in developing countries, is the issue of migration, irrespective of the region, whether it's in Europe, in Africa, or in Asia. And my colleagues from immigration will attest to this by looking at the records that they handle on a daily basis. So why is it a concern to ILO? Because this is where the mobility of labor happens, because it could be migration for anything. But our interest in this mobility is on how to ensure safety of the workers. And I believe my brothers from COFTU will agree me on that, as well as my sister from Uganda Human Rights, is it Human Rights Commission? Yes, because we can talk about migration, but our interest is in the labor migration aspect of all this migration. So how do we facilitate safe and secure migration of the workers? And we cannot do so minus being aware of what kind of data exists, what are the collection points of this data, and what is the central depository where this data can easily be accessed. Because one of the challenges we have seen, including us in ILO, when we are talking about labor migration, is yes, you'll hear pieces of responses from different agencies, departments, and ministries that, yes, we have this data, but if you ask for it, it's not easily accessible. So as we validate this report today, let's not just look at the sources of data. Let's also look at accessibility of this data, because if we have the data and it's not accessible, how will my colleagues from OPM handle elements of enforcement which come along with monitoring? How will my brothers from COF2 and NOTU support with the monitoring function? So let's not only look at the validation of the data sources which are going to be presented today, but let's also discuss the elements of accessibility. And then two, as we listen to the report that is going to be validated today, let's open up as different stakeholders. It's good that we have someone from Bank of Uganda, and I mentioned Bank of Uganda specifically because, and Uganda Investment Authority, because data on remittances is what will possibly trigger our improved attention to management of labor migration. Because normally, if you don't put an economic value on something, people do not pay much focus. If I got up and said, all of us in the room today, here, our net worth is probably $1 billion, we would all begin looking around ourselves and saying, who is probably the highest of all this in terms of net worth? Then all our focus will be there. So it's the same with the monetary and economic value that comes with labor migration through the remittances, because that is the most official. Of course, there are other sources that we can get such information, but most of it should be from the central bank. So the key thing here is, beyond the central bank, how can we improve on our data management through improving on coordination? The Minister of Internal Affairs is represented through immigration. The central bank is here, Investment Authority is here, the trade unions, Ministry of Labor is here, the Bureau of Statistics is here. How do we coordinate better in managing this information in order to guide our brothers and sisters who are not in the room here today, who handle elements of policy formulation? Because UBOS will focus on collecting the data, and that's it. Beyond collecting the data and analyzing it and sharing, I don't think UBOS has that mandate to provide policy guidance. We have tried it before. Over the several years, I've worked closely with my brothers from UBOS and sisters to work on labor force survey and analysis, also work on youth employment data collection and analysis. But the shortfall comes to when we begin to focus on policy recommendations, because that is not their mandate. So how can we together, as we validate this, also look into the element of coordination? The representative from Ministry of Gender has just walked out, but if you listened closely, especially, I know Chairman General, you were there, the minister said we have the management information system functional. This morning, Karl Marx from the Ministry of Labor was also confirming that. But what is the role of the other partners in this system? What does it feed to? If I ask my brother from immigration whether he's aware of this and how it links, can he articulately say, yes, there's a module within this that interfaces with us? Because this is now part of the functionality of the system and how it improves on coordination. So let's look at this also. It's not only sources of data, but how do we improve on coordination, including with key institutions like the central bank, including with key organizations like the trade unions, because it becomes very central. The trade unions, I know, working closely with the Association of Labor Exporters in Uganda, UERA, and they have recently signed an MOU Where do they fit in this coordination framework? And then lastly, out of the three key things that I would want to mention is going back to yourselves, but also to the Bureau of Statistics. This report that we are going to validate today is a result of a short-term project within the ILO that focused on about 7 countries within the IGAD region: Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Ethiopia, Sudan, both South and Sudan, Djibouti. And the 6 months duration for this is almost elapsing. So the report will definitely come with recommendations. Now, recommendations inform continuity of such processes. So how do we sharpen these recommendations to enable continuity beyond just this research duration? Because if the recommendations are not well sharpened, there could be continuity, but it might be minus Uganda, because you're talking about 7 countries. So how do you, gathered here today, support the process of sharpening these recommendations for your interest as key players? Whether you are from the Central Bank, from Investment Authority, from COF2, from Ministry of Labor, what can we do? But also, what can we demonstrate that we can do without waiting for that second phase to come in? So the whole idea of sampling frameworks and the tools you use for collecting data on labor migration should also be key within what you discuss. Because if you don't have the right tools to collect this data, then you'll not have the data. I know you collect on a semi-what regular basis national labor force survey data, but you also have the household data and others. So which are those regular surveys for which we can develop appropriate tools to collect data on labor migration? So I think those are some of the things we could look into, because we all know from public information that government is saying we are distressed and we don't have enough financial investment to put into some of these things. So can we develop appropriate tools that allow us plug into regular surveys? Ministry of Gender has the EMIS. Can we look at how it's functioning and build additional modules that allow for integration with migration, with the Central Bank and others? So those are the top 3 things I would want to leave with you today, but also to pledge ILO's continued support to the whole discussion on labor migration, especially with a focus on better management of migration, because it's only through this effort that we can ensure the safety of workers, that we can ensure the appropriate development of policies that safeguard the interest of workers, and most importantly, gradually move towards engaging government to sign more bilateral labor agreements, because that is where it is ultimate. All of this we discuss eventually leads into bilateral labor agreements which are more country to country and ensure safety of the workers. With these few remarks, I beg to stop here, and I will excuse myself at some point. And when I do, it's not that we are not here, but we do have Mr. Andrew Mukulu, my long-term friend, who is the ears, eyes, and the brain for us during these discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stephen Opio, for those kind remarks. You highlighted accessibility, coordination, commitment, and we'll take that as, especially as we discuss this report, to see how we can better those areas. So thank you so much. Now, before we move further, I would like to first of all introduce my good friend, Mr. Jonda Nwamanya. please come near. Mr. Junda is a senior statistician at the Bureau, and he's going to help us as well to facilitate this process. And from this point, let me hand over to him to take us through the next sessions. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Perhaps since the next will be more presentations, we shall request the representative to the ED and ILO focal person to take their seats on this side so that they can follow the presentations that will follow. Thank you. Over to you, Junda.
Thank you, Michael. The representative of the ED, the representative of ILO, dear participants, good morning. At this juncture, we are moving ahead with the program, and we are going to receive the report, the overview of the Better Regional Migration Management Project, which is going to be presented by Mr. Mukulu. Mr. Mukulu, you're welcome to take us through the next part of our workshop. Thank you. Are we going to use the podium? Where?
Good morning once again. My name is Andrew Mukulu, statistician by background. Found myself doing labor statistics of recent, but I have a long history of doing population censuses. And I'm here to give you just a quick overview of the project that funded the activity that we are dealing with now. Just to have an idea of where it all started. The real presentations will come later, but this is just to have an idea of where it all started. Like Stephen has said, there will be out of repetition because Stephen has said half of what I intended to say, but it's very difficult to plug out the other half and say only what he has not said, because then my statements will not be flowing. The Better Regional Migration Management Project is a project funded by the UK Federal and Commonwealth Development Office and executed by the ILO in the countries that Stephen mentioned. When we are talking about these countries, the most convenient way is to talk about the East and Horn of Africa. But a good summary would be in the IGAD region. I think it's more of the IGAD region. East and Horn is not well defined, but if you say IGAD region, I think it's about that area. And the project has three main pillars. The way they are arranged on paper, the project is overall aiming at improving migration management within the region. And it has three pillars. To me, the way they are arranged on paper is a bit of a reverse, but that is how they are arranged. The first pillar is on better statistics. I know you'll be wondering why a statistician is saying that the arrangement is in the reverse. But when I was in school, I was told that statistics are collected to inform something else. They are not collected for themselves. So you should know what you are going to inform, then you look for statistics to inform. But this is how it is arranged. So no, that's not what I'm presenting. It's all about that. So the first pillar is on improving statistics on international labor migration generally, and I'll be elaborating more about that because that is a subject of the day. But it also has other pillars. The second pillar is on better skills, improving skills for the migrant workers. Those of you who deal with migrant workers, you know that there are so many things that are involved in skilling the migrant workers. Pre-departure and post-return, there are many skills involved. I know some of the skills which may look simple are not always simple. There's a general complaint that people go out for migration, for migrant work, and when they come back, they are at zero. Basically, they have spent 3 years, but they are at zero because they did not have good skills in management of the resources that they made when they were doing the migrant work. So that is one of the aspects that is covered by this project, training people in skills on financial management of your resources when you come back. And the best way to do that is to train you before you go. You are not trained when you come back. Otherwise, when you come back, nobody will capture you because you'll be. But also skills when you are going. And then the third aspect is increasing the capacities of the partners in negotiating better, what should I call it, labor agreements, better policies relating to migrant workers and the rest of it. So these are the 3 major pillars that the project is working on. Like was mentioned, it is a short project. It was initially designed as a 6 months project, but it couldn't get executed within the 6 months, so it was extended to 8 months. And its life expectancy comes to an end at the end of May. But as it is expiring, the intention is that it should leave something that whoever is around can pick on and continue with it, with or without a project. Zeroing on statistics, what has it done? The first thing was to cut out, the English may be a bit confusing, but it is a study of the sources of labor migration statistics in the country. At some moment it's called a mapping, at some moment it's called an assessment, at some moment it's called a scooping study. I don't want us to focus so much on the difference between what a mapping is and what a scooping study is. But basically to understand what are the sources available, what are their strengths, what are the weaknesses, and how can we tap into them to inform policy. Remembering that whenever we are talking about statistics, we want to inform policy. So these studies were done in 2 bits. The statistics offices were assessed separately, directly by the project staff, and then what are termed administrative sources, that is the other entities, MDAs, and private sector organizations, were assessed by independent consultants. This was done for 2 countries, Tanzania and Uganda, and we are now here to validate the findings for Uganda. A similar process will be taking place for Tanzania, and hopefully the lessons from these 2 validations. One, they will inform statistics management in the 2 countries, or statistical production in the 2 countries, but also be replicated in the other project countries in the East and the Horn of Africa. Then, for some other countries, Ethiopia and Djibouti specifically, an assessment was done, almost similar to what was done here, but this was done with a view to setting up a labor market and migration information system. Again, this is a study that, these are studies that have been completed, and processes similar to what we are doing now will be done in the next few weeks, in the next weeks, so that after May, when the project expires, those two countries can move on. I think in the case of Uganda, maybe you don't need that assessment because according to what Mr. Pio was saying and what Max was saying, we don't need an assessment of our readiness for a labor market information system. Rather, we need a strengthening of our labor market and migration information system. So we do need something slightly different. Another activity that the project did or undertook was building capacity of people involved in statistical production in the techniques of collecting or generating statistics on international labor migration. This was done for all the member countries, but it was done virtually. I'm certain that Uganda participated in that training. The Bureau of Statistics participated, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs participated, Federation of Uganda Employers participated. And this is a course that took place in March, but it was virtual. And you know the challenges of virtual training. You depend on how much somebody tells you that they've understood. You are not so sure whether they are there all the time. But nonetheless, when the assessment came out of the something like 43 participants who registered, 35 actually participated in more than 50% of the training sessions, which I think is a good score, given that the training lasted almost over a month, not on a daily basis, but if you have something that is spanning over a month and you maintain 35 out of 43 participants, I think that is a plus for the organizers. And I know that Uganda was there at the end. One of the participants is Sharon Apio. She was seen up to the end. And the other participants could also be monitored. The project also hired a consultant to develop a quick guide on generation of labor migration statistics. This is not a textbook because we believe that the people who are involved in generation of labor migration statistics have the textbook material. But this is more of a guide that tells you how to do it under the current circumstances. We have the guidelines from the International Conference of Labor Statisticians. How do we operationalize them? How do we collect information that is relating to the indicators that the representative of the ED was talking about? So it is not teaching somebody statistics from scratch. Rather, it is now operationalizing the labor migration statistics requirements into how to practically do them or implement them. And finally, one of the things that any sampling statistician would know is that collecting information on labor migration statistics from a normal household survey is it's not very easy to get good numbers to give you the accuracy that you'd want. So again, the project has hired 2 consultants. I know you may be asking that if you are there, why are they hiring consultants? If I did all this myself, then I would need maybe 3 years to be doing it. So, because it was a short-term project, it preferred the option of hiring consultants, and then we supervise the consultants, rather than us sitting on our desks, and then we spend forever not getting any results. So, 2 consultants, one for Uganda and one for Tanzania, have been hired to generate methodology for collecting labor migration statistics from sample surveys. And the labor migration statistics, like the representative of the ED indicated, are quite varied. remittances, recruitment costs, numbers of persons moving, numbers of workers, numbers of returned migrant workers. So many things are involved. So it's not just capturing so many people who are involved, who are labor migrants, but you want to get their characteristics. And it was felt that sample surveys, the way they are now, may not be the best. They are a good tool for collecting the information, but they need to be tweaked a little bit so that you get exactly what you want. So these consultants were hired. They are still working. We are hoping and praying that by the time the project comes to an end, we would have gotten a generic sampling methodology from them that national institutions can use to collect information on labor migration statistics. But I should also mention that this project is not working in isolation. There are many efforts on labor migration statistics in the region. The IGAD is collecting a lot of information on labor migration statistics. The ESC is collecting a lot of information on labor migration statistics. And the Africa Union is also interested in information on labor migration statistics. And just last week, there was a meeting in Djibouti, and the purpose of that meeting was to harmonize methodologies so that all these institutions that are working on labor migration statistics in Africa, considering the importance of labor migration in Africa, especially the Horn of Africa, if we went into numbers, you'd appreciate how the Eastern Horn of Africa is key when we talk about international migration. So the meeting was aimed at harmonizing all these various efforts so that we minimize respondent fatigue, but we collect information that is comparable and coherent. Fellow participants, that's about the project. The project, like I said, expires at the end of May. Efforts are being made to have it continued. But in the event that it doesn't continue, the target is that it should leave something on ground that leaves the country running. It should not leave the country to say, we would have done something had we got phase 2 of the project. Phase 1 of the project should leave the country with a take-home. If phase 2 comes, well and good. If it doesn't come, we go with phase 1 takeaway. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Mukulu, for taking us through the overview of the project and highlighting the key features. At this very moment, I would like to request Mr. Michael Ogen to take us through the detailed presentation of the report on the assessment of the administrative sources of data for this project. I request that we all keep taking our notes. After the presentations, we are going to have a detailed discussion, and most of the things should not be left out. So it's good we take notes, and then we shall have a plenary session to discuss what is coming through the presentations. I thank you.
Thank you very much, moderator. Once again, my name is Mike Ogen. Now that we have an overview of the project and what has been happening, and as it was mentioned, we are here to validate the report. So the report is about assessment of data sources for labor migration. Now, generally, of course, we have two major, we can categorize the data sources into two broad categories. We have the administrative side, but also the surveys and censuses on the other side. So this presentation particularly will focus on administrative data sources, which you colleagues are very much involved in, as we'll see in the discussions in this presentation. So basically, we'll talk about the background in the next slide. The background, the data sources, the data quality, and some of the suggestions for improvement. So, just to highlight a few conceptual definitions here. To begin with, migration is basically about movement of person from one place to another. So we can have the internal, which in this case is in reference to the country, or international, which is cross-border in that case. So if it is internal, it means you have moved from one place to another, and you are changing your usual place of residence. So different countries may define this differently. It can be in respect to the smallest administrative unit. In our case, we have the LC, or village. That is the smallest administrative unit that we have. So depending on how it's defined, it could be movement between villages, or parishes, or sub-county, or district, or region. So when we are talking about internal migration, we must take into account the area we are talking about in respect to migration, because it's not all the same. It could be between sub-counties or across districts. So we are talking of changing your usual place of residence. Now, usual place of residence, of course, in Uganda, we have been defining it as in the last 12 months, if you have stayed there for more than half of that period, then that becomes your usual place of residence, which we are talking of 6 months plus. So if you have changed the place of residence, in other words, you used to be in one place and now you're in another for at least 6 months, then you have migrated. And then international is about crossing the border from one country to another. Then you become an international migrant. You have changed your usual residence, in other words, your usual country of residence, to another country. Then you're international migrant. So the main components are basically 4, as you will see, and one by one. Yes, when we start with looking at the first one, we are looking at international migrant workers. Remember, we are talking labor issues here, and that's why we are focusing on migration that is related to work. So we are talking of international migrant workers. What do we mean here? We have already said, first of all, the beginning point is that you are an international migrant. In other words, you have changed your usual place of residence from one country to another. But then you're also working or in employment. So you become an international migrant worker. He's an international migrant, but also working. The second component we want to highlight here is the one referred to as for work, international migrants. Now, again, the starting point, you are an international migrant, but now we go to the purpose of your migration. What was the purpose for you to move? What was the reason? It is known from the start that you're moving for work. You're moving to look for employment. So those are the for work international migrants. Of course, there are some migrants may move for other reasons and then find themselves working. So they become international migrant workers. But this category, their purpose is defined from the very start. The third component we want to highlight is the return migrant workers. So those who have been migrant workers and they go back to their country. So they changed the place of usual residence for work purpose, but then they go back. So when you look at these first three, you can see that all is about this. We can say it's about this country. So you have the international migrant workers there, or for work, international migrants, or you have the return migrant workers. But then there's this fourth category, persons working abroad. Now we are talking of the other side, those who have gone out of the country. They were usual residents here, they were general nationals here or citizens here, but then they have moved to work in other countries. So these are some of the concepts, some of the things you will find in the report as you read, talked about, and the figures that are presented in the report, highlighting some of these areas. So now, we already talked about the potential data sources or the main data sources. We said they are broadly two, administrative and the surveys and censuses. But of course, when you talk of censuses and surveys, we have the population census, for example. We also have the sample household surveys. Population census is also mainly a household census. You visit households to enumerate the population in the households. Then the surveys are basically a sample which is taken from the census frame, and then you conduct, it's also a household-based survey, but we also have establishment surveys. Establishment surveys, and maybe if we go to the next slide, we see some of these sources which are not censuses or surveys, but mainly focusing on the administrative sources. Perhaps when you look at that, what is projected there, you could tell where you fall or where you fit in this whole system. Population registers, for example, the best that we can talk about here now is the NERA system, where the population is registered for identification purposes. And if we are talking of the whole population, then we know who the nationals are and who are migrants within the country. We also have the border management systems. From immigration, we have those who intend to travel to the country, who get visas to move to the country, and that system gives us what the migrants are. There are those, of course, who make short visits. Remember, we talked about a reference period, which we said actually that it's not one standard for all countries, that many countries try to make adjustments. But we talked about, for instance, between a range of 3 months to 12 months for one to be defined as actually a usual resident, for you to qualify then to be either migrant or not. Because remember, there are those who cross the border for maybe 1 week visit and they go back. We don't count those as migrants. It must be if they intend to stay or they have actually stayed for a certain length of time, and most times between 3 to 12 months plus. So we also have the work permits that are issued to foreign residents who are working in the country. These are all sources of administrative data on labor migration statistics. We are talking about the migrants who have come in and they are in the labor market. So those who are working or employed, they will have, for instance, work permits that the Ministry of Internal Affairs provides. We also have the persons in diaspora. This is basically Ministry of Foreign Affairs through the embassies and through the system, the external employment system that our friends from the Ministry of Gender have. So we can get that information about those who are in other countries and what they are doing, especially those who have gone for work. Information, the former ones, information is actually available. Additionally, we could think of records by refugee agencies like UNHCR having records about refugees and those who have crossed borders or even moved from internally displaced people and who are working in different parts of the country or they have crossed the border. We have the Investment Authority. We have foreign investments in the country, or perhaps looking at directors of investments in the country and their nationality. That can give us an indication of migrant workers within the country. So these are all potential sources of labor migration statistics. Talk of the tax register, the tax returns that are done, and the directors of these companies. So we can be able to tell whether they are Ugandans or they are migrant workers in the country. NSSF, generally the social security system, should be able to differentiate whether these are nationals, these are citizens, or not. So these are different potential sources of administrative labor data, and particularly migrant or migration labor statistics. So now we can talk about the findings. We have seen generally what the sources should be in real situation. But what was the finding of this study? Of course, like we have noted, there are many different institutions that collect migration-related information. Talk of immigration services, the work permits that we have talked about. We know the central bank, for instance, does with UBOS remittances survey. Well, that could be on the surveys and censuses, but the central bank has some work it does about remittances, which is different from the survey itself. What are the remittances into the country? This gives us an indication of labor migration, which means we have people in the diaspora who are doing some work, who are employed, and are making remittances into the country. That aspect of it is administrative. But the remittances survey that the bank may be doing with the bureau, going to the field and collecting primary information, that is on the other side of the source of surveys and censuses. But looking at the administrative side, the remittances that we receive, what they monitor as remittances, is a potential source for this labor migration data. However, we note there are issues, of course, for improvement, especially in relation to data quality. Data quality has many parameters, but just to highlight here, we are talking about if two institutions are collecting similar information Are they comparable? Is it coherent? What are the definitions used? What are the conceptual definitions that are used? Are they the same? Because however slight the concepts may differ, that in itself creates a data quality issue if you want to try to aggregate information for the country. So comparability, coherence is an issue across institutions that compile similar kind of information. But the other core ones are timeliness. When is the information collected? Compare with the time when it's made available for the public to use. When you look at it yourself, do you feel satisfied with the time that the information is disseminated? We'll definitely agree that it's not satisfying. We want to have real-time data. A lot changes within a very short period of time. So if we delay to disseminate, to make data available for stakeholders, for those who want to use, it will become obsolete. Before you know it, many things have changed and we need new information, and we are still processing the old one. Then accessibility. How widely is it disseminated? Is it readily on the website? And what is on the website? Is it the report? Is it the data? We all know that when an activity is undertaken, think of a survey or think of the administrative records that we compile. Maybe we are talking about work permits or we are talking about remittances. But how much information is collected? There is a wide range of information that's collected. Compare with what is disseminated for the public to use. So the best practice is to have the microdata available. Of course, as a country, we have to work hard to improve, especially in that area of having microdata available for use by anybody who wants to use. Because if not, we only have what is presented in the report. If you want additional information, you can only do additional analysis of what is available. So if it is not disseminated, it becomes a challenge. There are generally no clear procedures for revision. The key word here is revision policy for the data that is being compiled. How often do we revise? In terms of, first of all, frequency of compilation, but also the data that was compiled for last year. Do we make an update of that in the following year? And if so, what is the policy? How many years do we update backwards? Do we update 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, or 3 months? That's the kind of policy we are talking about. That revision that are being done, what is the policy in updating such information? Now, analysis is something I've highlighted. We have said the administrative sources are not adequately analyzed and disseminated. We have already mentioned that there's a lot of information that may be collected, but you find not all of it is analyzed, and yet not all of it is available for those who want to do further analysis. But of course, we appreciate the limitations, especially in skills. Even the facilities for data production in the units that handle data processing, how many skilled persons do we have in processing data into statistics, into information, into policies? That is also noted as a limitation, especially in relation to administrative data, the capacity of those institutions. In some institutions, the level of digitalization, computers may be there, but where is the data stored? Is it in the server, or the data is localized within the computer? Perhaps one computer which is working as a server for data storage, for data processing, is the same. So the level of digitalization is also a challenge in making it hard to convert these records. Some of them may be, perhaps we still have the hard format of data that was collected some years back. Have we been able to convert them into soft forms that are easy to process and easy to store? Sometimes data from administrative sources are incomplete or not up to date. You find some variables may be updated, but because we are collecting information and maybe there are non-responses in some areas, when that year passes, then we focus on another year. So in the long run, you may find a variable that ended some years back. Some variables are up to date, but others are not. So the need here for really deliberate effort to update those incomplete areas. Lack of coherence and compatibility of data from different administrative sources. I think I already highlighted that. So now, some suggestions for improvement, and in this area, of course, you can really take note and provide your comments, your views on the suggestions here being proposed, because then we will have it amended and it becomes now the final report. We're talking of the increased availability of labor migration statistics in censuses and surveys. Of course, this one cuts across to even the censuses and survey sources, especially to increase. There are usually questions about labor migration statistics in those surveys and censuses. I know my colleague will elaborate more on this, but we are saying more needs to be done. Remember the 4 components that we talked about, and we want to look at the characteristics of all these, whether in or outside the country. We want to know their characteristics. So to achieve that, there is need for more information in those surveys. Then we talked about dissemination. What is the legal framework within the MDA on dissemination? What is the policy? Perhaps there is need to strengthen the legal basis for dissemination, that whatever is collected needs to be disseminated. Otherwise, well, of course, some information is really needed for internal use, but we know everybody needs this information. And that's the reason why we are collecting. Or is it that we are putting a burden on respondents on extra information which is not necessary? But if we know the information is necessary, then it should be disseminated, what we have collected. So within the institutions, and perhaps as a country, there is a need to strengthen our dissemination policy. Also, the coordination mechanisms for labor migration statistics, so that we have a coordinated approach to ensure that perhaps there may be duplication. You find this establishment is collecting the same information that the other one is collecting. If we improve the coordination to weed out any duplications that may be there, this helps us to improve the quality and even the quantity of the statistics that we produce. Enhance capacity for data production, especially among administrative sources. Capacity in terms of the personnel itself, the persons who are compiling these statistics, that they are the right persons and they have the right skills to compile the statistics, but also capacity in terms of the facilities to be used. Do they have the right tools? Do they have the right equipment to use, both hard and soft? And do they have the capacity to use these tools to produce the labor migration statistics? So need a comprehensive data quality assessment. We need to assess the data quality for the different sources in terms of the concepts, the definitions that are being used, generally the parameters of data quality, the timeliness that we talked about, coherence, so that the data that is provided is of good quality. These are generally the dimensions of data quality that we are saying. Is the information or the data accurate? What are the computations used to arrive at this indicator? Does it meet the international standard? We know sometimes we talk of domesticating certain variables, but that should not make it lose the international strength, the international definition and how it is computed. So we have to ensure that the accuracy is there. Accessibility. I remember even the ILO focal person talked about this. Accessibility to data and to statistics, to information. It's still a challenge. You can even find, by the way, even inter-institution. Perhaps you'll even find that it's a problem within the institution itself, that someone from one department wants to get information from the other department. I see my father nodding. You know, Karl Marx is the... yeah, he calls me my son, so... Yes, you may find within the same institution, this department wants information from this one, but it's a challenge. Accessibility. Now, if within an institution is a challenge, how about inter-institution? How about those who are even outside the academia and the like? Comparability and coherence, integrity of the information that we provide. The method that is used, is it sound? Is it to the standard? Relevance of the information and timeliness. Just to say that improving data quality, of course, needs a deliberate effort, and we know that the Bureau supports the Bureau's business is about data and statistics, the coordination and also production itself. And the Bureau is ready and has been supporting many MDAs to improve the quality of their statistics. So if you identify that there is need, there is gap, it's good we approach the Bureau so that we can work with the Bureau to improve the quality of our data. Administrative data is really core. The Bureau cannot collect everything through the surveys and censuses, and we need to really work and improve and coordinate our administrative data sources so that they are of good quality that meets both international but also our national needs. So thank you very much for listening, and I now invite back Mr. Junda. I think we'll now have discussions. Please feel free to raise anything about, especially the recommendations highlighted, or anything in the report, but especially now in relation to the administrative data sources. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for the elaborate presentation on the administrative data sources and taking us through what has so far been done and the challenges and what we're looking forward to doing. We are moving forward to the discussion of what has been presented to us. Feel free to begin with the comments by the bosses who opened up the workshop, up to the technical presentation by Michael, and then any matters arising therefrom, we can deliberate on them, and what we can conclude on or decide on, we may be at liberty to do the same. I'm going to invite the presenters of this morning to take their front seats, and then we begin on the discussions. There is no particular order that we are following. Anyone who has a matter to raise, will bring it forward and will be answered by the presenters. I'm going to request Mr. Mkulu, Mr. Ogen, and the ED's representative to resume the seats in front. As they come, who would want to break the ice? Karl Marx. I'm also going to request Karl Marx to come up front because you're going to be the moderator of this session. Yes, you're going to be the moderator of this session. And your question, you will begin by presenting your question, and then you will be the moderator of this session. Thank you, Mr. Karl Marx. Your seat is up front here.
Thank you so much, sir, for clearing me methodologically to be part of the gentlemen seated here in front of you and also asking questions. Mine are not questions but comments. Broadly speaking, I am very delighted, we are very delighted because the data sources are clearly mapped. Part of what I may prefer to add on at this particular moment in terms of the administrative data sources, potentially from where we can extract labor migration data, besides what we have been given, are the following. International reports compiled by a myriad of agencies, say the United Nations Department for Economic and Social Affairs, UNDESA, International Organization for Migration of the United Nations, and others. Then the other domestic source may be Uganda Registration Services Bureau, in addition to what Mike has already very ably given us. The challenges are spot on, and the proposals are clinically accurate. Having said this, I would love to thank the conveners of this workshop, the technical people that compiled this report, UBOS and the entire fraternity that is around, for the good work done. Thank you so much. Since I have been told to mediate this session, let me take this opportunity at the same time to invite discussions, questions, and others that will enrich this discourse that we are holding. Please, the mic holder, kindly move on and solicit members' input. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the report. My name is Agnes Igoye. I'm the Deputy National Coordinator, Prevention of Trafficking in Persons. I was looking at the sources of the data, and I was also looking at my office, that we have people who are taken and irregularly. They may not necessarily pass through immigration, for example, and they are into forced labor or challenges within labor. And so the Coordination Office for Trafficking Persons, even if they didn't work legally, so I think, you have to highlight where that falls in there. I was also looking through, the report, and I saw when you're talking about the legal regime framework, you're quoting the recruitment of migrant labor regulations of 2005, but there were new ones. I thought Karl Marx would mention that, because that is under their ministry of 2021. And so maybe you can, correct that. So the other ones automatically replace the 2005. Thank you.
We want to be sure.
Thank you. Cohen Brains from ERSB. Thank you, the presenters, for the presentation. Mine is focusing on the recommendations. One of the recommendations was to strengthen the surveys. And here my question is, are there any limitations under the labor force survey? I haven't read the whole report per se, but under the manpower survey, I don't know whether there are any limitations that have been cited, and they should come out explicitly in the report, and then it will eventually support the recommendation. Thank you.
I don't know where the questions are being directed, because the ones asking the questions are not specific. So please give specific whom you want the answer from.
Just a minute. Our presumption is that the questions are being directed to the technical persons from the Bureau. Thank you very much. But nevertheless, let's be clear and channel the questions to the precise person or persons. Thank you very much for the observation.
Okay, thank you, moderator. Once again, my name is Okecho John Sell, Chairman General Central Organization of Free Trade Unions. I want first of all to thank the workers of Uganda for the Labor Day celebration that took place in Kololo. And of course, as a leader, you remember the statement that came even from His Excellency the President, that the organized workers are few. I am here requesting the workers of Uganda, please join trade union, because it is a way for us to negotiate for better everything, as you know. Number two, I wanted to thank the organizers of this meeting for making a lot of research that I'm getting convinced that you have done something, you can clap for yourself. We have been putting red eyes because our people are suffering. There are those that they remove some parts of the body, but the government was quiet. Now I'm very happy that we have woken up and we are working as a team to make sure that migrant workers are attended to. And I believe this policy is going to help us. As workers, we had also come up with a digital database because we are seeing that people are really suffering. And of course, at the Labor Center, Koftu, we have a desk that is handling that. One of the issues that we are raising and we are happy with in your report, it is about what you have so far explained, orientation. People go, they do the work, they don't know how to even handle the little money they have. Skilling. So it means that our people must be oriented. They should be positioned that say, there's a desk that before one does anything, you must go through orientation. Our colleagues also raised the issue of coordination. As you are aware, in anything, if you are not coordinated, of course you can't move on well. So the area coordination, we are convinced that all the agencies must work together and we coordinate. The issue of the recruitment, it should be in line with the labor laws in order to avoid any gap. Where is the person going? What is the contract? What are you going to do? What is the remuneration? What is ABCD? We need to work as a team to make sure that is covered. Then another thing, it is about monitoring. In the policy, we need to put it clearly that you are saying if it is international migrants, do we have a monitoring system that will follow these people? That where I am really safe and I'm doing my best. And then also another concern is that I've not seen where we have captured the area of women, the youth, and maybe people with disability. I think we need to capture it in our whatever clearly so that everything is captured. I think for now I would end there, and I thank you for inviting the workers.
Thank you, the Chairman General. I think, Mr. Moderator, the consensus behind here is that we first answer those, then we take another round.
Okay, thank you so much. Let me request specifically the person who made this presentation on behalf of the Bureau, with permission from the representative of the Executive Director of the Bureau, just a minute. Let me request that person to answer the questions or throw highlights, please, as we move on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, moderator. Let me make some comments and then perhaps also Mr. Mukulu could comment, or representative of the ED. The first was from the moderator himself, but I think it was an addition, a comment about possible sources of administrative data and I think this is taken on. It will be examined to see if labor migration data actually does exist in those reports. I think the statistician for the project took note of this. The other one was from Agnes. The tricky one is this one, persons taken irregularly, or persons, sometimes it includes persons who are trafficked. Now, of course, illegal business is also difficult to monitor and difficult even to collect information about. Of course, we are not saying that what is illegal should not be monitored or statistics should not be obtained. The challenge is how such statistics is obtained. But also, in this case, remember we are talking about labor issues, migration for labor. The reason is labor. Now, some of these may be trafficked for other purposes. Chairman General Koftu was talking about removing parts. I don't know how. For such reasons, of course, illegal issues become very difficult. The thing is, it's difficult to collect information about what is illegal because whoever is in the business is also hiding. But I think as long as there is information that we can collect that is available, and especially at the start, someone may be moving illegally, but then when he reaches a destination, he's engaged in labor issues, that should really be part of the group that we are talking about. Labor, the migrant workers. It doesn't matter how they moved, though. We normally have what's called the formal and the informal. Of course, those whom we will find in the database of the external employment will basically be the formal ones. The ones we know, the recruitment agencies that record them, that formally take them for labor issues abroad. But there are even those who may actually not be going for illegal businesses, but they are informally moving to other countries. There are those who do not pass through those recruitment agencies. They may not register anywhere, but they are in other countries. The challenge is how to capture them and be able to collect information from those categories. So, yes, that's what I can mention at this stage. I know it's a tricky, when it touches on the illegal areas, it becomes very tricky, but we can get some more comments on that. About the recruitment law that was updated in 2021, I think that's good information that we take note of for update. URSB talked about, was asking about what the limitations are or could be there with the surveys. I would request that perhaps we can postpone that question until after the next presentation, where we have censuses and surveys as a data source discussed. And if that is highlighted, that's good. If it is not, then the question can come back and it's answered then. We also had comments from Chairman General Koftu, trade unions, and advocating for members to join workers' union. By the way, the number or proportion of unionized workers, that's I think an SDG indicator, if my memory gets me right. So, well, our role is to measure, and we take positively the comments by Koftu. In a number of areas, I think there were comments for improvements disaggregation of women, youth, people with disabilities. This is a disaggregation issue, which is always catered for in data collection. But it's also a reminder anyway, for in the administrative data sources, in the tools for administrative data sources, are we able to identify, for example, PWDs? I know women or youth, that's usually a given because we collect age, we collect whether male or female. But many tools may not provide a variable for persons with disability, which is a core issue here that we are being reminded about. Thank you. Mr. Mukulu, you could add some comments.
Thank you, Michael. I think, you know, I worked with Michael for so many years. So I feel like saying my brother Michael. And then I remind myself that we are working for different entities now. But I think we are still brothers. Any presentation on labor migration would end up, in most cases, with a statement that no one source can give it all. At least any time I've seen somebody talking about sources of labor migration statistics, that is the conclusion. No one source can give it all. So, as Michael was elaborating how it is hard to get information about the illegal movements, it is true you may not be able to capture them through the border points because maybe they have bypassed the border points or they have cheated you at the border points. But you may be able to capture them when you do something else. Maybe if you do a census, you do a survey, or you do some other activity. And that emphasizes the need for using a multiplicity of sources to come up with a profile of labor migration into or out of the country. True, I'm not saying that it is easy, but we are not focusing at only one source and we say, since I can't get them through border posts, we are resigning on that one. The question is, how best can we get it? What is the best tool for them? And I'm sure you know that many innovations have come up to try to capture information that does not come cleanly. When Michael was presenting about remittances, he talked about what Bank of Uganda does about remittances, which it does very well through official channels. But at times you find that many of our cousins, when they send us money, it doesn't go through the official channels. So the best way to get that is to actually come to us and ask, did you get some money from someone? And then the volume of what you capture, you capture better. You may not capture 100% accurately, but you capture better. Bureau of Statistics, with permission from ED, has for years been conducting informal cross-border trade survey. I don't know whether ED remembers the year when they started. But the whole idea was to capture things that you not capture officially when you go through the customs records. The maize that keeps crossing over in small bits and pieces. The best way to capture it is look at it as it is crossing on wheelbarrows. Don't wait for it in the customs declaration. I'll not dwell so much just in case I'm caught on the wrong side of that. Then the Chairman General adds, we don't coordinate with respect to only one dimension of statistics. The whole idea of coordination is to ensure that we help each other whenever we can collect information that our colleagues need. So, if you are collecting information and you can capture information about something like disability status or incomes, it's better you coordinate with others who are interested in it rather than saying our team is just migration statistics. When you are interested in PWDs, you go and coordinate in your own circles. So the coordination should be across the different entities. And bearing in mind, I've already said, the person we are talking about is the same person. It's the same person in education, it's the same person in labor, it's the same person in migration. Although we publish the statistics differently, but the person is the same. So as we are coordinating, we should be focusing on coordinating to help each other to capture the information much better. And about the new sources, the extra sources that have been mentioned, I think they're more than welcome, and I promise that the report will capture them. We shall be doing a one-on-one to move them from just a list, but also to what they capture and how they can be integrated into the other sources. I thank you, Chair.
Since the ED is not adding a particular comment at this point, and allow me to thank the gentlemen who have gone through your questions, allow me to invite another round of questions, views, or comments. Thank you very much. Agnes, somebody's coming your way. Thank you very much.
I'm going to request that we take chap since we are chasing time, and we go to the next session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm glad. Thank you for highlighting that. I know that's difficult, as you said, to capture information where people move irregularly, but at least we have where to start. For example, last Friday we launched this report of last year, and on forms of exploitation on victims of trafficking, labor remained the biggest form. And it clearly highlighted even the countries with the statistics. So labor internally, 94. You see the incidents. And then transnationally, 105. So it even gives you the countries, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Oman, Jordan. So they are all listed. And the good thing about this report, speaking of coordination, it's produced by statistics from 14 ministries and departments, and with the representation of NGOs. So this committee, which is anchored into the 2009 Prevention of Trafficking Persons Act and regulations. So the permanent secretary heads this committee, and we have meetings every month. And in those meetings, people present that. And right now, we've just completed a database. And when we launch it, it's going to go digital, and it is going to help very much. So you can start from here. It doesn't mean that, we are really lame. And I know that when we have that database, we'll be the first, I think, in Africa, which is really a plus, for Uganda. So this is where to start, and even when you're talking about coordination, where coordination works well, we welcome you to Benchmark, the coordination office, because Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development. What we also did in that coordination, there are 2 representatives per MDA, such that when one is not able, the other comes in. And the follow-up has been helpful. So this report, and coordination office is a good starting point. I also wanted to comment on the work permits, because I know that you ended until 2020. If you want up-to-date statistics, because now we have 2021-22 up to Q3. So we have a whole, now that everything is digital, we can provide, up-to-date. And we have it even here right now, if you want that updated. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, moderators and the presenters for today. My name is Apple Masete. I have two comments. One on the presentation made by Mr. Ogen. I want to appreciate the suggestions. One which he said that is strengthening coordination mechanisms for production of labor migration statistics. I would add that perhaps for better coordination, we could give a consideration of interagency integration. For us at immigration, when you are collecting data, you will find that the data collected at international airport is not connected to the one at Busia. So if we can have intra-agency and interagency integration, so that when I need data from labor, it is easier for me to tap into the system and pick it, even not to waste anybody's time. The way we are connected with URA, it is easier for me to tell that a permit which is given to a certain labor migrant who is working in Uganda is genuine, and my turnaround time for facilitating the facility is going to be short. This could be added on the enhancement of the coordination. The second issue, Mr. Ukulu talked about the issue of the guide. No, the quality of statistics could also come with a tool for labor migration collection. That guide, I'm very eager. If I don't know how soon we shall get it, because it is going to be very important in guiding us when we are collecting some of the data you want. For example, if we are talking about the remittances, does the guide, or do we have anything that talks also about skills remittances and perhaps social and cultural remittances, or it is only limited to monetary remittances that are captured by the Bank of Uganda? Finally, I'm looking at the project, the regional data migration management. At the regional level, East African community, do we have also the ability to tell how easy the Ugandan labor force in the region, let's say in Tanzania, how easy can they access the facilities that regulate them to work in this country? So that perhaps we reciprocate. When Ugandans in Kenya, do they easily access these tools to make them enjoy working in those countries? We could also have those considerations in some of the, so that it will be easier for us to be sure that our people working in other neighboring countries can enjoy the same service that we give. For us, we know we have the processes that are very clear for anyone to get a facility, but what happens to our people across? Thank you very much.
Finally.
Thank you so much, presenters. What I can observe from what has been presented so far is that we have a variety of the data sources. But what you have to note is that what is the major problem is always is, do these data sources, are we able to generate information and we communicate results? These kind of data sources giving us consistent results and we speak up the same language. That is what we need to debate. That we may have a variety of sources, but sometimes the data does not really communicate what we may observe or what we may be seeing. That is number one. Number two is that sometimes these data sources are not broad enough to capture whatever we may need. And because I may need, for example, on these kind of migrants, I may need to understand. We are saying that these migrants are from maybe in Uganda, maybe China, and so on. What are they engaged in? Are they real investors, or they are just casual workers? I may not be in a position to communicate that. And the other issue about our workers, what about our workers going out? Are we able to capture really the information, where they are going and what are they engaged in as being what we need to know? Because actually we can see that there is a complaint about this trafficking of workers. And sometimes we find that even those ones who are engaged in organs, whatever business and so on, they are really not trafficked. They are sent through real registered organization. They are not trafficked. You can be, there is one channel where some people can be through that, others are. We have seen some labor organizations being suspended, because meaning that people really went through proper channels. Do we have a mechanism that we can put in place to make sure that at least we are sure that when you go through the proper channels, you are safe? What is in the existing framework? What can we do to make sure that we protect these labor workers? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll add on a few observations and issues of concern. Just beginning with where my brother has stopped. There seems to be lack of information about the destination countries where our workers are going to work. The countries where they are working, it looks like we have limited information. This information, the data that we are collecting here, concerns here. Okay. How about the data the other side? Because if we want to put things right, I think we also need to have enough information concerning the countries of destination. There seems also to be issues with attitude of the employer, the other side. What should we do to align ourselves with the attitude? I don't want to say it is wrong, or it is bad, or it is negative, or positive. But the attitude, the relationship of the employer and employee also is measured by the attitude, the sentiments. And as people or as countries providing workers, we need to work on that. We need to see how to engage and ensure that the attitudes are positive, such that when you are working, you feel safe and secure. Then how about the laws governing the worker who is coming from a different country and working in a different country? Just in case there are issues in the relationship between the worker and the employer, how do we implement? Because I told you I sit on a panel in Industrial Court of Uganda, and sometimes it becomes difficult when it comes to liability. Who is liable? Is it the agent? Where is the employer? How do we get him? And this is our worker who has gone to work there, is providing service, but it looks like there's a dilemma, especially when the relationship goes sour. So I think let's look at all that. That's mine for now. Thank you.
Okay. Over to you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much for the final session of plenary questions. With your permission, Mr. ED, allow me to request Mike and Mr. Mukulu to respond. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Again, I'll say, make some few comments or response. I know most of the comments have been, most of the submissions have been comments, but just to, perhaps we need to acknowledge that we have taken note of all. And for instance, the inter or intra-agency coordination, my friend has emphasized that, which is a good thing. Of course, the ultimate is to achieve total coordination as a country in relation to administrative data. How do we achieve this total coordination that all administrative data can be easily accessed without much hassle or having maybe to move to an institution here and there? That is something that we need to work on. But of course, we start through the inter or intra-agencies to achieve the bigger coordination. Labor migration guides, I think Mr. Mukulu is in a better position to talk about that. And the project, access to facilities in other countries, whether the project is looking at that, extending to assess what happens within the region, what happens, for instance, workers, Ugandan workers who are in Kenya, and how difficult is it for them to access facility. We could make a brief comment on that. But someone talked about sources, reliable sources, whether the administrative data that we have is reliable. Can it give us statistics that can provide sufficient results to make policies? To me, I think the sources are reliable, very, very reliable. The issue could be how much of the information is really captured. What is the proportion that is captured vis-a-vis the magnitude of what is available? Can it be used to make policies, to make decisions? If not, it means we need to scale up resources to be able, by institutions, to capture these. And this is where the issue of coordination came in, that you may find institutions that are duplicating. Then we can weed out duplication and ensure that we scale up the magnitude of coverage so that the information is really of good quality. You also say data sources may not be broad enough, which I agree with you, in the sense that, institutions, first of all, they have the objective of why they are collecting this information. So they will focus first on their primary objective. Why are we collecting this information? So when issues of labor come in, it may be secondary to the objective for which the activity is being undertaken. So having to widen the scope of the labor subject, of course, means a lot for this case of the institution in terms of what they are able to collect, in addition to what they want to monitor. What exactly do they want to monitor? Work permits, what is the main objective of registering or having work permits, or think of remittances? What's the main objective of monitoring this? That objective is there. So to add on labor issues, of course, it's a secondary objective that need to be widened, but this is only possible within what the institution is able to do. But to start with, we need to ensure that whatever is collected is made available, and we make use of what's available. Then we can demand for more to improve the statistics that we have. Of course, our workers in other countries, that one is it's a tough one to study them, because first of all, you need to, when you're collecting information, we need to avoid proxies as much as possible, which means we want to collect information from the primary source, who is the worker. So think about a worker who has been taken to some country, and because the conditions are not good, the employer is aware. Perhaps even the agency that recruited this worker is aware. So if we collect information from the agencies, for example, they will give us what should be the story and not the real story. That's why it's important to collect information from the source. But we know the challenges that are involved when we come to that. How to reach that final person to give information. Perhaps you have to work with the embassies to be able to reach. Their contacts themselves may not be easy to find. And even when you find them, are they free to talk, to be interviewed? So all those are challenges that relate to those externalized workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I think Michael has handled the concept of workers outside the country very well. Just for the record, that the ILO is clear that as of now, it does not have clear guidelines on how to collect that information. It is something that is being worked on, but there are no published guidelines on how to collect that information. Regarding the practical guide, for now, the practical guide is concentrating on collecting numerical statistics on labor migration. It has not interested itself in other aspects of labor migration, but possibly after we have perfected how to collect the statistics, the numbers, the flows, the stocks, then it can be extended to look at other areas. Because if we try to do everything at the same time, we may never have a guide at all. So let's get one that helps us get the stocks and the flows and their characteristics. Then we can interest ourselves in other areas. Mike has said, and I want to repeat, that whenever we talk of data from administrative sources, we should always bear in mind that the person we are approaching had a motive when they were starting to do whatever they are doing. If URS is registering a business, they had a motive of registering a business, and their motive was not collecting statistics. We are collecting statistics as a by the way. So we should not try, we should not build resentment from URSB by asking them to collect so much well beyond what they went out to collect. I know I'm the one talking about coordination, but if you had intended to ask 3 questions and somebody gives you another 20 questions to ask, it is always much easier to reject than to cooperate. So let's look at administrative sources as taking advantage of information that is being collected to give us what we want, rather than looking at administrative sources as data collection activities. If we do that and we ensure that whatever they are collecting is collected correctly, we would have moved a bigger step than trying to get everything from that one source and we end up getting nothing. Mr. Moderator, I thank you very much.
Thank you, discussants, for the questions that you have really ably answered, and to those who posed questions, and the entire congregation here for participantship. We are now going to the next phases, and the first of these will be the presentation of the assessment report on censuses and surveys, as have been advised, which will then be proceeded by the presentation on medium term and strategies for improving availability of labor migration statistics. And allow me to take this opportunity as I wind up to invite the responsible persons for this to assume their responsibilities. Thank you so much.
Thank you, moderator. This one is a short presentation. Of course, as we mentioned it at the start, we have two main areas of collecting labor migration statistics. We have been able to look at the administrative sources. Now here we are focusing on census and surveys. So that is the content is like similar to what the previous colleague had. We are looking at we are starting with a definition. We are trying to define what international migration is. I know my colleague looked at it, tried to define it, but it's just trying to look at crossing the borders, okay? And in the process, the use of place of residence changes. So that is international migration. And of course, you also mentioned that the migration areas is sort of country specific. And of course, we don't, you don't look at the distance. If you are crossing from Kenya and then you are coming to Uganda, then so long as you are changing your use of place of residence, then you, irrespective of whether you are coming from Kenya or you are coming from China, we don't really consider distance as such. And of course, with the internal migration also involves changing the area of residence, but within the same country. My colleague talked about what he meant by, talked about the 6 months because if you change the like for a very short period, then you will not be a migrant. But for Uganda, we are trying really to look at the 6 months as being the minimum. Now, we try to look at some of the information that can help us to measure international labor migration. Place of birth, okay? Place of birth. And when we're talking about international labor migration, of course, we talk at a country of birth. Someone is changing the country. So we sort of draft a question in our census or surveys, and we try to find out where someone was born. If someone is now staying in Uganda, we try to find out where you are born, and now you are in Uganda. And we think that this is a very clear concept, and really very easy to be understood by the respondent, the person that we are asking that question. And then it is we are able to really capture the international movement. Because if you know you are born in such a country and now you are now staying in a different country, and we really shall know that you have really changed the place of use of residence. Very easy to measure. And a number of countries are able also to get this type of information. So we can be able to compare across various countries. The other information that can help us to get this is on country of citizenship. Yes, then this may really not really be able, in some cases, may not be able to really capture the actual international movement. Sometimes you can have more than one country of citizenship, so that in that case that you may have multiple answers. And this really can change over time. Okay? But it's really very, very relevant in as far as the legal rights are concerned. Here we try to look at many components of international labor migration. I think the previous president really highlighted all the main components here. I don't need to really repeat what he said. We're just trying to save on the time. Next slide. Okay, then the potential sources of labor migration statistics. And then we start with the census. Okay. Since 1962, that is independent, Uganda has carried out 5 censuses. And this is done approximately every 10 years. The last one being done in 2014. Then we are planning another one to be done next year. Then there are some household surveys that really collect information on which could be potential labor migration statistics. We have the National Labor Force Surveys, which have been carrying out since 2011, 2012, with the support from various stakeholders. And so far we have done like 3 of them. We try to put in some questions on migration, and of course some questions on labor, so that we are able to get data on labor migration. We also have the Uganda National Household Surveys, which are carried out every about 3 years. These are surveys where we get information on the poverty levels in the country. Okay, and we can be able to link this information to some other characteristics. Then we have the surveys of remittances. I think Michael really mentioned this, that UBOS really carries out with the BOU. Then we also have surveys, establishment surveys, and censuses. We have what we call the census of business establishments. And we have the manpower survey. And of course, we have also mentioned last we have the administrative sources that we have already discussed. So here briefly, we try to look at the finding from the assessment, what was really found from the population censuses. So the censuses, starting from 1991, can be able to get the non-citizens, immigrants, and return migrants. Based on the question that I put there, we are able to get that information. So in addition, there are some other information that's collected in the censuses. information on a labor force attachment, and corresponding information on demographic characteristics. Okay, so we get information on things like occupation, we do industry, we do, as far as labor is concerned, that as an employment. But again, we do the demographics. We're able to get the disabilities that one colleague was talking about. We can be able to get the sex, the age groups, including the youth, and all that. Now, we follow the international classification. Like, we use the ISIC, International Standard Classification of Industries, the ISCO to do with occupation, the ICSE to do with the status on employment, then ISCED to do with education and the skills. Where it was necessary to make the national specific classifications, we have always been doing this, putting into consideration the international classification. Now, in as far as the census is concerned, the census is a complete count. So we don't leave anyone out so long as that person spend the reference period, the one we shall call the reference night, in the boundaries of the country. So that information is really collected, including the information on refugees. Now, the dissemination is done really widely using the various media, including the social media. We have even moved down at the local levels and disseminate at the various districts. We start with the national, we have regional meetings, and that information is also available on the website. Now, a colleague was talking about the availability of information. In the census, we have a big sample. There's a big sample of microdata that is available. So in every 10 households, there's one person that is included in that sample, and that is really available for public use. There is also metadata that are available. Metadata is data about data, explaining what the data is all about. Like if you are talking about PWDs, what do you mean by PWDs? You have the indicator, then you try to define what it is. So that is really available. I want to just mention that we are trying as much as possible to ensure that this the metadata, although previously it was not really very available to the public, but we're trying as much as possible to make sure that it's also available to the public. For instance, as of now, we are compiling the SDGs metadata handbook. That should be available to the public. Later, we shall be having the NSIs, National Standard Indicators metadata handbook also, which should also be available. But allow me also to look at this. Some of the strengths of the census information. For mention the universality of coverage. That just means that everyone is covered in the census. And that one really allows information even to be disseminated at the very lower levels. So, a census is carried out every other 10 years. So at least we know that we are able to look at the trend, okay, because that period is known. We can't carry out a census now and then wait for another 30 years to carry out a census. Every 10 years, or approximately every 10 years, we have a census. Now, there are some few weaknesses that we can also try to carry out. No analysis on international labor migrants. Well, that's one of the weaknesses, but going forward, that should be, we are trying to avoid that. We have tried, in the next census, what we are trying to include a number of questions on international labor migration. Because it has been appreciated that this information is really very possible. So it should be, at least in the future, it should be really available. And of course, we have also mentioned that this is done every 10 years. So waiting until another 10 years, because that is really a weakness. But so because of that weakness, probably we can also try to look at having this information, as we have always been mentioning, that we can get it from some other sources when this is not there. There's this other bullet that talks about limitation of the information that is collected. Because it's a census, we are involving so many people, and we are going to each household. So there's that limitation of the number of questions that we will include in a population census. As of now, there is no information on immigrants from censuses. People who are moving out, that information is not there. So in conclusion, we are saying that there is, census is a really potential source of information on international labor migration. We really appreciate all that. But we need to do more to ensure that this potential is we are able to can be exploited. Potential is there, but we really need to do more. First, I already mentioned about what we are going to do in the next census by including more questions in the census. So I think going forward, that's what will happen, so that we are able to get as much information on international labor migration as possible. Now, about the sample surveys, these are the findings. Now, the National Labor Force Surveys and the Uganda National Household Surveys. You can use this the variables or the information that's there to identify the non-citizens, the immigrants, and returning migrants. That can be got from that. But we should also know that some of these exercises, as I had mentioned earlier, they have a reason why if you are talking about UNHS, the emphasis is on generating the poverty numbers. So if you go ahead and include so many questions on labor migration, it is you will get some bit of resistance from within. So in addition, we really collect information on labor market characteristics. So we are able to get information on unemployment rate, the time-related unemployment rate, and labor underutilization from such surveys, from the household-based surveys. And of course, as we go ahead, we always collect the classifications on ISIC ISCO, ISCAD, ICSE, are always embedded within these surveys. I think we have already talked about that. Now, the household-based surveys, we only go to the households. The earlier surveys used to go to only household, but the discussion to ensure that we are able to go even to some areas like the refugee camps and all that in this household survey. And I think it has already started. Some of the surveys are targeting some of those areas. So, and the efforts were made to ensure participation of all persons in the sample, but not specifically. Now, this sample, when you are doing a sample with when you select this sample, you ensure that all the persons that are really covered in the sample are interviewed. So this is but of course, because you are really not really going to specifically target the migrant population. You're just looking at the sample broadly. The survey reports, just like census, are really able to be disseminated widely through various channels, and even they are available on the website. They are disseminated through the social media and all the other channels of dissemination. Metadata are also available for use by the public. With microdata, as of now, it is, if you make a request, they can be able to give it to you, but ensuring that this bit of confidentiality is maintained. So we do something to do with the identification particulars of the various units, be it them households, be it them individuals, but we can be able to give you that data if you request for it. Now, strengths and weaknesses of surveys. Because they are surveys, we are able to get some detailed information on migration statistics and labor market characteristics. And because of that, the bit of labor migration characteristics can be got. The National Labor Force Service, as of present, are able to get the outflows. So when you come to your household, previously when we are not getting that information, but as of present, we can be able to get the outflows. So we have a module that collect information on outflows. So when we come to the household, although we are not able to, may not be able to interview the person, because that person will be living outside the country, but when we come to the household, since this person moved out of that house and went out, we correct detailed characteristics about that person by interviewing the person who is in the household, not the immigrant. We collect information from the household members, but on the person who is, we ask you, the household members, when did so and so leave this country, your household? Where is this person situated? What is this person doing outside the country? What was the qualifications of this person when the person lived? Why did he move outside that country? Extra. Okay, there are some weaknesses. Of course, as we mentioned, is limited to household population. There is something to do with sampling design, because you would wish that probably when you are carrying out this survey, you are able to get information on labor migrants at probably more, at relatively lower levels. But because of the observation, you find some limitations. Like if for some other characteristics you are able to get information for the 15 sub-regions, probably in this case you may not be able to get that information, especially for the people who have moved out, because the observations are few. So, and of course, this area of smaller areas estimate, because they are surveys, we are not able to get. Like if you ask me, and the demands have been, what are the displacements? We are not able to get this information from surveys because the design is that they are able to give us information probably at lowest at sub-region level. So we can't be able to generate the small area estimates. We also cannot identify return international migrants from these surveys. We still have some limited information about immigrants. That is really a data gap. So in conclusion again, we are observing that the National Labor Force Surveys are really a potential source of international labor migration, but still we need to do more to ensure that we exploit this source. Next. So we have some other surveys that in addition to the National Household Survey, in addition to the Labor Force surveys, there are some other sources. Surveys of foreign remittances. These are done relatively every other year. And the focus is mostly on remittances. That is, according to the design of those surveys, the focus is remittances. And little is really collected on the migrant workers. We also have the census of business establishments, and with the focus on the businesses that these establishments are engaged in. And the information on the videos, yes, that information is collected, but sort of in aggregate. By aggregate, I mean that, for instance, if you are going to an establishment, then you want information on foreign workers, you will have to do, you'll ask how many managers are here, foreign managers, instead of saying so and so is a foreign manager, so and so. So you just ask that aggregated number and how much probably those people are earning. If they tell you there are 5, and say, oh, on average they earn so much. As opposed to saying, oh, Wilson is a foreign worker, he earns such and such. John is a foreign worker, he earns such and such. So that information is not available from these business establishments. The National Manpower Survey is also potential source, but the focus here is mostly to do on the formal sector, because these are a bit organized and it's easier to collect information from them. So emphasis is both on the establishment and the people who are employed in that establishment. So the findings, there's limited information on about individuals, as I have mentioned. If the information is there, it's put sort of aggregated, and the remittance surveys, we're able to get remittances from these surveys, but of course there's that limitation also on capturing immigrant workers. And of course, as I've said previously, these are still very important. These other surveys are really important. They are able to complement the other information from censuses, surveys, and administrative sources in as far as profiling the international labor migration information is concerned. But as we have mentioned before, we can't use these sources alone. We need to get more sources of information, which you have mentioned, administrative sources and some of those other labor force surveys, national labor force surveys, and all that. Now, during the assessment, there was some information that was also collected on the capacity of UBOS in collecting the labor migration statistics data. As UBOS, we of course we have that legal mandate of collecting the information. Okay, but in addition to collecting this other information on migration and labor market characteristics. So this is part of the information that we are supposed to collect. Collection of this information is really very clear in the existing administrative structure of the Bureau.